Hello all! This week we're discussing dams and how they impact fisheries. Dams are important for human civilization because they provide electricity, flood control, transportation, and irrigation for agriculture as well as for general use. However, they also change the way that rivers function. They impact the biodiversity of the river and are a barrier to certain species, such as juvenile salmon, who are trying to migrate to the ocean and make it difficult for adult salmon to return to their natal home rivers to spawn. For this week's assignment and forum, I decided to look at dams in the Pacific Northwest, specifically dams that are located in western Washington, which is where I call home. I chose this area to research this week because I know that there are a lot of dams around, but I'm not really sure how many, or even how many had to be removed, so it was interesting to read about that in the data set this week. So two of the dams that I am looking at are the Elwha River Dam, which is a hydropower dam which began operation in 1913 at River Mile 4.9 on the Elwha River, and the Glines Canyon Dam, which became operational in 1927. So these dams are located on the Elwha River. The Elwha River is located in Washington State on the Olympic Peninsula, and the majority of the river is part of the Olympic National Park now. However, when the dams were built, it was not a part of the Olympic National Park. The nearest city is Port Angeles, Washington, and the Elwha River runs from mountains up in the Olympic National Park down to the Strait of Juan de Fuca. And both dams supplied energy to Port Angeles and helped with the operations of a nearby paper mill, which is why they were built in the first place. These dams created two reservoirs, Lake Mills and Lake Aldwell, where there was recreational fishing until the dams were removed and the lakes dried up. So historically in the Elwha River, there were all five species of salmon, the Chinook, coho, pink, chum, and sockeye that spawned within the Elwha River, as well as steelhead, which are also rainbow trout, cutthroat trout, bull trout, and dolly varden. After the dams were built, salmon species were unable to reach the upper river, which caused a lot of their numbers to decline due to habitat loss, and then those that were living in the lower part of Elwha River, their numbers started going down even more with commercial fishing in the Pacific Ocean. So two hatcheries were built in the Elwha River, one by the tribal members of the Lower Elwha S'Klallam tribe, and the other by the state, by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. The tribal hatchery mostly dealt with coho salmon and steelhead and had some success with spawning efforts, but their catches were relatively low and fluctuated constantly. The state hatchery focused mostly on Chinook salmon, and those were caught a lot by marine fisheries when there were abundances of returns of Chinook, but there's no recreational fishing in the river of Chinook and limited catches by tribal members, and so those that did reach adulthood and come back to the river, a lot of them succumbed to disease and parasites before they could spawn. So when I started thinking about dams and fisheries this week, I kind of had to remind myself how many fisheries are impacted by river systems, since I'm so used to thinking about fisheries in a marine setting. Dams are a huge impact on fish populations, and therefore fisheries, in that dams block migrations of fish, as well as change the quality, quantity, and accessibility of their habitat, which is critical to sustaining fish populations. Fish, especially anadromous ones, can be injured while moving through hydraulic turbines or spillways when going between spawning and feeding grounds. Water quality is another big issue that changes when dams are built, since waters downstream from dams can be very different from the upstream water. Water temperature changes, and then the levels of oxygen and nitrogen within the water can change as the water goes down spillways or crests over the dam, and can change the quality and composition of the water, which impacts fish species that are living in there or trying to migrate through. But it's not only fish species that are affected by dams, but also crabs, shrimp, crayfish, and other bottom-dwelling species that rely on specific riverbed habitat to survive. And sediments are blocked from flowing downstream, which changes riverbed consistencies and changes seafloors at the mouths of rivers, which allows things like kelp and seagrasses to take over at the estuary mouths of rivers, where there used to be sandy floors that were perfect for crabs and other bottom-dwelling species. So what are some of the possible harms to populations of fish in fisheries due to dams? Dams change the habitat and water quality, as I said, which makes it so that fish spawn or feed in different areas or cannot at all, which causes populations to decrease and sometimes become extinct altogether in certain rivers. In the case of dams on the Elbow River, the river south of Glenn's Canyon Dam was all but completely cut off from the rest of the river, which didn't allow for any anadromous fish species that lived in the river historically to be able to reach their natal spawning grounds for almost 100 years, until the dams were removed in the early 2000s. Thank you. Have a great week, everyone.